When the child started sinking to the bottom and the lifeguard froze, everyone expected chaos. What they got was a demonstration of precision diving that only one kind of man could perform. Welcome to Hidden Valor. Before we share this powerful story of service, sacrifice, and hidden courage, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe real heroes deserve recognition, hit that subscribe button. Everyone knew Marco Delgado as just the gym's swimming instructor. At 42, he was calm, unhurried, and never seemed stressed. He'd been working at Ocean View Fitness Center for 3 years. Mornings were water aerobics classes, afternoons were swimming technique lessons. People knew very little about Marco. The locals knew he came from somewhere down south, was exceptionally good in the water, and did his job quietly. Members noticed he never got winded, could stay in the pool for hours, and moved with unusual comfort even in the deep end. Marco's like a fish in water, gym manager Janet would say. Never seen him get tired. There were details that didn't quite fit though. Marco had a faded Navy cap in his locker, but nobody asked what it meant. His hands were unusually strong and scarred. The way he moved in water was too natural, too fluid. He could hold his breath for impossibly long periods during pool cleaning. His swimming technique was perfect, but had an efficiency that spoke of advanced training. When he demonstrated rescue techniques, his movements made certified lifeguards look amateur. But nobody connected these dots. He was just Marco the trainer. Every morning at 5:30, he'd arrive early, check pool chemicals, and perform maintenance with attention to detail, usually reserved for critical systems. Members trusted him because he was patient, never raised his voice, and somehow made everyone feel completely safe. But nobody knew where that sense of safety really came from. Nothing serious had ever happened on Marco's watch. Parents joked that their kids were safer in the pool with Marco than in their own bathtubs. Marco had developed routines that seemed obsessive. He checked pool depth markers twice daily, inspected ladder rungs, and maintained water standards that exceeded requirements. The chemical balance was always perfect. "He runs this pool like a military operation," one lifeguard commented to Janet. She'd smiled and said, "As long as nobody gets hurt, I don't care if he thinks he's running a submarine." Members had grown accustomed to Marco's quiet presence. Children gravitated toward him naturally, sensing something trustworthy. Adults appreciated his professional distance, helpful without being intrusive. But there were moments when something else surfaced. Like when a member challenged Marco to a breath-holding contest and watched amazed as Marco stayed underwater for over 3 minutes. Or when maintenance required diving to the 15-foot section and Marco volunteered without hesitation, disappearing with calm confidence. These incidents were forgotten, filed away as anecdotes about their skilled pool guy. Nobody asked why a fitness instructor had such extraordinary underwater capabilities. That Saturday had unusual energy. It was the first warm weekend of spring, and the facility was packed with families. The pool area buzzed with chaotic harmony of multiple generations enjoying water together. Marco monitored the increased activity with usual vigilance, but seemed more relaxed. He'd helped senior citizens with water aerobics, then worked with swimming lesson kids, mixed ages, from timid first-timers to confident intermediates. Jessica Martinez was pulling a double shift, covering for a sick lifeguard. At 19, she was competent, but crowded conditions tested her attention span. As afternoon wore on and nothing eventful happened, her focus drifted. Tommy Chen was one of Marco's regulars. 9 years old with more enthusiasm than technique, he'd progressed from shallow end to intermediate depths with growing confidence. His mother, Sarah, often brought little sister Emma, splitting attention between encouraging Tommy and managing the toddler. The environment felt safe, controlled, familiar. That Saturday afternoon started like any other family swim session. Marco stood poolside, explaining breathing technique to Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman overcoming her fear of water. Jessica Martinez, the 19-year-old lifeguard, was distracted by her phone, texting about evening plans. 9-year-old Tommy Chen was feeling brave. He'd been taking lessons with Marco for 2 months and thought he was ready for the deep end alone. His mother, Sarah, was helping his 2-year-old sister at the shallow end. At 3:47 p.m., everything changed. Tommy pushed off with more force than ever, determined to swim the deep section. But halfway across, his breathing pattern fell apart. He lifted his head too high, threw off his rhythm, and suddenly took in a mouthful of water. Panic hit instantly. Instead of calm movements Marco had taught him, Tommy thrashed wildly, driving himself deeper. His scream was cut short as he slipped beneath the surface. Sarah spun around. "Tommy!" she screamed, but she was too far away and couldn't swim well enough to help. Jessica's head snapped up, seeing Tommy disappearing underwater. She froze, training suddenly feeling inadequate. She blew her whistle but couldn't move. Tommy was completely underwater, sinking toward 12-foot depth, his small form growing dimmer. That's when Marco's true identity emerged. Marco's response was automatic. Years of dormant training suddenly activated. He stepped away from Mrs. Patterson and moved toward the pool with purposeful precision. His dive was unlike anything anyone had witnessed. His body entered the water like a precision instrument. No splash, no wasted energy, just clean entry that barely disturbed the surface. Underwater, Marco transformed. His eyes opened immediately, scanning depths with systematic precision. Tommy was 12 feet down and sinking. Marco's descent was controlled, his body cutting through water with minimal resistance. What astounded onlookers was Marco's underwater endurance. Normal people could hold their breath maybe 45 seconds under stress. Marco had been underwater over a minute, moving with confidence of someone who could stay much longer. When he reached Tommy, his rescue technique revealed advanced training. Instead of approaching from above like civilian protocols, Marco came from below, preventing the drowning person from grabbing the rescuer. His positioning was textbook military, one arm securing Tommy's airway, the other controlling ascent rate. Marco's rise wasn't rushed. Despite having an unconscious child, he managed controlled decompression that spoke of deep water experience. When they broke surface, Marco's breathing was steady, not gasping desperation of emergency rescue after nearly 2 minutes underwater. Every person in the pool area had stopped and was watching in stunned silence. When Marco surfaced with Tommy, he moved toward the pool edge with the same controlled urgency that had characterized his entire rescue. The child was unconscious, his lips tinged blue, but Marco's demeanor remained impossibly calm as he lifted Tommy's limp form out of the water with surprising ease. What followed was a masterclass in emergency medical response that left no doubt this man had done this before, many times, under much worse conditions. Marco immediately positioned Tommy on his side in the recovery position, checking airway clearance with the systematic precision of someone trained in combat medicine. His fingers found the carotid artery instantly, checking for pulse, while simultaneously assessing breathing patterns. When he determined CPR was necessary, his technique was nothing like the basic certification classes most people knew. This was military-grade life support. "Someone call 911!" Sarah screamed, running toward them. "Wait," Marco said without looking up. "Give me 30 seconds. His chest compressions were perfectly timed, the exact depth and rhythm that suggested advanced medical training. When he performed rescue breathing, he sealed Tommy's airway with the expertise of someone who had done this in combat zones where failure meant death. 25 seconds later, Tommy's body convulsed as water came up from his lungs. His eyes fluttered open, and he began coughing violently. Marco immediately turned him onto his side, supporting his small body, while the chlorinated water drained from his respiratory system. "That's it, buddy," Marco said in a gentle voice that contrasted sharply with the intensity of his actions. "Get it all out. You're safe now." It was then that David Hernandez, who had been watching the entire sequence from his deck chair, approached with the slow recognition of someone who had just witnessed something extraordinary. David was a former Navy SEAL who ran a local security consulting business, and what he had just observed didn't match anything a civilian swimming instructor should know. "Hey," David said quietly, kneeling beside Marco as Tommy continued to recover. "That rescue technique? Where exactly did you learn that?" Marco looked up while still monitoring Tommy's breathing. "Just trying to help." But David wasn't backing down. His trained eye had caught details that others missed. "No, seriously. The approach angle, the decompression control, that medical response. I've only seen that level of training in one place." A small crowd had gathered now, including Janet the manager, several parents, and Jessica, who was still pale with shock. Tommy's breathing had stabilized, and Sarah was holding her son, while tears of relief streamed down her face. "Thank you," she whispered to Marco. "You saved his life. I don't know how to—" "No need," Marco said simply, standing up and brushing pool water from his shorts. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," David said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who knew what he was talking about. "Anyone wouldn't have done that. What I just watched was Navy diver level performance. Hell, it was better than most Navy divers I've worked with. The pool area had gone completely quiet except for the gentle lapping of water and Tommy's gradually steadying breathing. Even the background music seemed to have faded. Everyone was looking at Marco, waiting for an explanation. Marco stood there for a long moment, weighing something in his mind. He looked at Tommy, now conscious and breathing normally in his mother's arms. He looked at David, whose experienced eyes held a recognition that couldn't be dismissed. Finally, he looked at the crowd of people who had trusted him with their safety for 3 years without ever knowing who he really was. "I was Navy," he said quietly. 15 years. Navy diver, explosive ordnance disposal. The words hung in the air like a revelation that changed everything and nothing all at once. "What do you mean?" Jessica asked, still in shock. Marco sat down, drying his hands as he began to explain. 1995 to 2010, I was a Navy diver. EOD, explosive ordnance disposal. My job was to clear explosive hazards underwater. David whistled. EOD diver, that's one of the toughest jobs out there. I was in various operations in Ukraine, Iraq, Asia. I'd clear mines underwater at 200-foot depths. Sometimes I'd stay underwater for 4 or 5 hours with breathing apparatus. Sarah asked in amazement, "Why are you doing personal training here?" Marco smiled. "Because water is my home. But now instead of going underwater to kill, I go in to save lives." Tommy had recovered and was sitting next to his mother. "Are you a superhero?" he asked with innocent eyes. Marco ruffled the child's hair. "No, buddy. I'm just someone who's good at his job." Everything changed at Ocean View Fitness Center after that day. Marco was still the same Marco. Calm, humble, hardworking. But people saw him differently. David regularly came to talk with him, sharing their military experiences. Sarah enrolled Tommy in swimming lessons to learn from Marco. "The safest hands," Janet would say when talking about Marco. "We knew him, but we didn't really know him." Marco never bragged, never talked about his military achievements. He just kept doing his job. But now people understood why he never got tired. A week later, Tommy came with his family to thank Marco. "When I grow up, I want to be like you," he said. Marco knelt down, got to the child's eye level. "Tommy, to be the best kind of hero, you just need to try to be a good person every day." Marco's story spread around town, but he never changed. He still came at 5:30 every morning, still worked with the same quiet dedication. The difference was in how people looked at him. They now knew Marco wasn't just a trainer. He was a man who had danced with death underwater for his country, saved countless lives, then quietly returned to civilian life. "These kinds of people live among us," David said in an interview. "Hidden heroes. They don't tell their stories, they just emerge when needed." The most powerful stories are lived in silence. People like Marco walk among us, doing ordinary jobs, until that critical moment arrives. That's when their true identity emerges, and we remember that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they stand at poolside, waiting patiently. Have you ever met someone like Marco? Someone who looked ordinary, but had an extraordinary past? Share their story in the comments, because at Hidden Valor, we value every moment of silent service. If this story moved you, subscribe and share. Let's keep giving voice to the hidden heroes. Thank you for watching, and remember, the person teaching your child to swim might once have saved lives in the deepest, most dangerous waters on Earth. Look closer, listen deeper, honor always.